the reason your character's dialogue feels flat has nothing to do with craft knowledge and everything to do with how your brain is wired? What if the way you naturally process the world is either your biggest dialogue superpower or the very thing that's quietly making your characters sound stiff, over-explained, or like they're watching themselves from a slight distance? Today, I want to talk to you about something I've noticed again and again working with writers one-to-one. The dialogue struggles are rarely random. They tend to cluster around the same patterns, and those patterns almost always trace back to how a writer is wired. Their NLP modality, their personality type, the way they naturally take in and make sense of the world. Today, I'm giving you the 3 principles of writing natural dialogue, as well as a tool I use in my coaching work called the subtext map. And I'm also going to show you how your wiring as a writer shapes your dialogue, so you can lean into your strengths and really shore up the gaps. So whether you've always found dialogue easy and want to understand why, or you've always found it hard and want to finally know what's actually going on, this one is for you. If you feel called to write a book, but writer's block, procrastination, and self-doubt keep pulling you from the page, you're not alone, and you're not meant to stay stuck. Hi, I'm Madison Michaels, author and life coach, and I've created this podcast as a creative space grounded in faith and mindset transformations to help you break through your blocks, gain creative clarity, and finally finish the book you're meant to write. So grab your cup of liquid gold and let's write the darn book together. Hello, my friend, and welcome to Write the Darn Book. I'm your host, Madison Michaels, and today we're talking about dialogue, specifically what makes it come alive, why some writers struggle with it, and how understanding your own wiring as a writer changes everything about how you approach it. This is a craft episode, but with a big mindset and personality layer running through it. So if you've ever felt like dialogue is either your natural home or your personal nemesis, I think you're going to find something really useful here. I want to start with something that I find genuinely fascinating, which is that in my own experience as a writer and working with lots of other writers, dialogue problems are rarely mysterious. They're actually quite patterned. The same struggles show up in the same types of writers. And once you can see the pattern, it stops feeling like a personal failing and starts feeling like very useful information about how you can work with your own brain rather than against it. So let's get into it, because understanding what dialogue is actually doing in a scene is where this all begins. I want to tell you about a client I worked with. Let's call her Sarah to keep her privacy protected. She came to me about 6 weeks ago and she was absolutely convinced that the manuscript she'd started to write had a really big dialogue problem. She'd been getting feedback from her critique group that her characters sounded a bit stiff, a bit formal, and she'd spent weeks trying to fix it by studying dialogue craft. She'd read the chapters in every writing book, she'd watched videos online, she tried applying all the techniques, and nothing was shifting. When I sat down and went through some of her example dialogues with her, I could immediately feel what was happening. Her dialogue wasn't technically wrong and it wasn't clunky or unnatural, but it felt disconnected, like the words were sitting on the surface of the scene instead of carrying the emotional weight underneath it. The conversations were happening, but they weren't moving anything. They weren't landing in the body. And what stood out even more was the emotional intensity was there, but it was happening everywhere except inside the dialogue itself. It was in the way our characters' chests tightened, in the way their hands trembled, in the silence between lines, in the action beats wrapped around the conversation rather than in the conversation itself. So you could feel everything they were going through, but when they spoke, the words didn't quite carry that same emotional charge. So when I asked Sarah, how did she actually experience dialogue when she read books? whether she tended to hear books in her head or see them like a film or feel them physically in her body or go through the dialogue logically to see whether it made sense. She paused for a moment and then she said, "I feel everything." She told me that she knows within a page of reading a book whether the book's going to work for her based on how it feels in her chest. She also said that she cries easily when she reads and that she gets pulled into stories through the emotional experience of them, not the language itself. And when she talked about her favourite scenes to write, she didn't mention witty dialogue or clever exchanges. She talked about the moments that hit her, the ones that made her feel something shift inside. And this was absolutely aligned with her writing modality because Sarah was a kinesthetic writer. So she felt things deeply and intuitively. And what that meant in her writing was this. She was tracking the emotional truth of every scene perfectly. She knew exactly what her characters were feeling in the moment because she was feeling it herself as she wrote. But she was expressing the emotion through the physical sensations, the movements, the internal experience, rather than letting it come through in the words her characters were actually saying as well. So the characters weren't emotionless. They were full of feeling. But when they spoke, they softened it. They held back and they spoke around the feelings instead of from them. And once she saw that, everything made sense about her dialogue and how she was writing it. So the shift for Sarah wasn't learning more dialogue techniques. It was about recognizing that she'd been keeping the emotional experience in the body of the scene and her characters. And that next level for her writing was to actually allow some of that raw, unfiltered feeling to actually move through the dialogue itself. Not all of it, just enough that when a character speaks, you can feel it land. And that one shift changed her manuscript, not because she suddenly knew more about writing dialogue, but because she understood how her own creative wiring was shaping that and what was happening on the page from it. And once she could see that, she chose differently. So let's pull this apart properly because what happened with Sarah isn't unusual, and it's actually the normal, to be honest. We all write from our dominant way of processing the world, and that shows up in dialogue whether we're aware of it or not. If you're auditory digital, which means you process things through logic, analysis, meaning, and internal dialogue, you likely have a strong natural relationship with language. You probably read your dialogue back to yourself and it sounds right to you, or if it doesn't, you tweak it because you're hearing it through your own ear and your ear is sophisticated and attuned. The risk, though, for auditory digital writers is that your characters all think and speak with your analytical precision, regardless of who they're supposed to be. What helps an auditory digital writer regarding dialogue is to actually step into the characters and sometimes make their processing a bit more messier, more reactive, more physical, or more expressive than your own. If you dive into the characters' personality traits and modalities themselves rather than your own as the writer, then you can actively express them more aligned with your characters. Now, if you're a visual writer, someone who processes the world primarily through images, so you see your story like a film running in your head, your dialogue scenes are often vivid and well staged. You can see exactly where everyone is standing and what the lighting's doing. The challenge, though, for you is that you can be so focused on what the scene looks like that the dialogue becomes functional. So it moves the action forward and it delivers the information, but it doesn't carry the necessary emotional subtext sometimes. Visual writers sometimes write dialogue the way a director perhaps describes a scene to an actor: efficient, clear, and a little bit external. Now, if you're kinesthetic, You feel your story deeply. You're led by emotion and physical sensation, and your writing has real gut level resonance. Your dialogue, though, often has tremendous emotional weight when you allow it to come through the words. The specific challenge is over-explaining the feeling beneath the words. Kinesthetic writers sometimes tell us what a character is feeling in the dialogue itself or in the action beats around the dialogue, like Sarah did. And in a way, doing that actually reduces the tension rather than building it. The feeling is so present for you as the writer that you want to make sure that the reader feels it too. But in dialogue, the feeling lands harder when it's implied rather than stated. So for kinesthetic writers, making sure to incorporate some of that feeling into the dialogue, not just the narrative beats surrounding it, can really help the dialogue to come alive. And if you're an auditory writer, you have a natural musicality. So you're drawn to rhythm and sound and the flow of language. Your dialogue can be genuinely beautiful to read. The challenge, though, for you is that you can prioritize how something sounds over what it reveals. So a line that has a gorgeous cadence might not actually be what this particular character in this particular moment of pressure would say. Auditory writers sometimes write the most poetic version of a line rather than the most true version of it. Now, none of these modalities is better or worse than others. They're tendencies. And those same tendencies that create your strengths are the ones that can also create your blind spots. Knowing which you are gives you something incredibly practicable, a map of where to pay extra attention. And it can also help you to access what your characters are feeling and thinking and want to say in their own dialogue. Now, something too I want you to consider is that your writing personality also shapes how your characters speak. And it's worth being really conscious of, particularly when you're writing characters whose personality type is very different from your own. If you're a dove writer, you're naturally attuned to harmony and the emotional undercurrent of a conversation. You write dove characters beautifully, characters who listen, who smooth things over, who choose their words with care for how they'll land. The stretch is writing eagle characters who barrel through a conversation without checking whether everyone is okay, or peacock characters who make every scene about them, or owl characters who go quiet and analytical when pressure arrives. If you're an owl writer, you bring rigour and precision to your characters' thinking. Your characters tend to be very careful speakers. The stretch for you, though, is writing the peacock who performs, or the dove who appeases, or the eagle who dominates without apology. And if you're a predominantly peacock writer, you write energy and charisma into your characters naturally. They leap off the page. The stretch, though, for you is the quieter characters, the ones whose power lives in stillness and restraint. And if you're an eagle writer, your characters tend to be decisive and bold and direct, which is wonderful for certain characters. The stretch for you, though, is writing characters who perhaps are a bit softer and they defer to others. They might say everything except the thing they actually mean, which is very different to an eagle personality type. Now, the point with all of these is that you can absolutely write outside of your own type. Of course you can. The point, though, here is that your own type will tend to be your unconscious default. And defaults operate invisibly until you're actually aware of them. And once you're aware of them, you can write outside of them deliberately. And keep in mind, most of us are all a combination of personality traits. So you might actually gravitate to writing a few personalities very effortlessly, but there might be some personalities that perhaps aren't your dominant personalities that you might have a little bit more difficulty with accessing and writing from their point of view and their dialogue to allow it to shine through. Now let's dive into the 3 principles of natural dialogue, because these apply regardless of your modality or personality type. They're the craft foundations that all of this sits on. In real life, people almost never say exactly what they mean. And that's particularly true in emotionally loaded situations, or when something's at stake, or when vulnerability is involved. In those cases, people often deflect and they answer potentially a different question than the one they were asked. They might even make a joke, particularly when they're scared, or they could go cold when they're hurt and just say nothing or I'm fine, when they're absolutely not fine. Your characters can do the same. If a character is devastated, they probably won't say, I'm devastated. They might say nothing at all. They might say something completely mundane, like, I'll go and put the kettle on, with everything falling apart inside them when they do that. And that gap between what's happening internally and what's actually spoken aloud is where all the tension lives. The question to ask yourself in every dialogue scene is, what does this character actually want to say, and why aren't they saying it? The answer to that second question tells you everything about who this person is and what they're protecting. A character who stays silent because they're afraid of rejection behaves very differently to a character who stays silent because they're furious. The specific shape of the avoidance is character revelation, so use it. For auditory digital writers in particular, watch for the tendency to write characters who express themselves with too much clarity and precision, even in moments of high emotion. Real people under pressure often don't speak in well-formed sentences. They fragment, they contradict themselves, they say the wrong thing. For kinesthetic writers, watch for the tendency to state the emotion that should be living beneath the surface. Let the gap instead do the work. Now, the second principle is every character has a distinct voice. So every character should sound uniquely like themselves, not like each other, and not like you. This is one of the most common dialogue problems that I see, and it's almost always modality driven. Characters who all speak with the same vocabulary, the same sentence rhythm, the same emotional register, that's a writer who hasn't yet stepped outside their own processing style, and instead they're using their own style for all of their characters. Here's a practical test. Cover up the speech tags in a page of your dialogue, and can you tell who's speaking them from the words alone? If every line could belong to any of your characters, you've got a voice problem. And the solution is to go back to who the character specifically is. What's their background, their relationship to language? What's their personality type as the character? What's their modality? What does this character say, and how do they say it that no one else in the scene would say in exactly that same way? Now, your eagle character charges at a conflict head on, whereas your dove character will try to smooth things over. Your peacock character makes sure they're interesting even in a crisis, and your owl character analyses before they respond. Those aren't just behavioural tendencies. They show up word by word in how each character speaks. And if you're an owl writing an eagle, you have to consciously leave the analysis behind and let the character just go. Now, the final principle is dialogue breathes. So what does that mean? Well, that means the space around the words, the pauses, the interruptions, the trailing off, the beats of physical action between lines carry as much weight as the words themselves. When you write a rapid-fire exchange of dialogue with no texture, no silences, no moments of action between the lines, you create a scene that feels slightly unreal. Real conversations have friction and space. Someone looks away at the wrong moment. A question might hang in the air for just a beat too long before it's answered, or someone might pick something up and put it down again. These aren't fillers, they're information. They tell the reader what's happening in the body and in the space between people while the words are doing something else entirely. For visual writers, this is actually a natural strength. You can see the room, you know where everyone is, you can ground the dialogue in physical reality beautifully. For auditory digital writers, it's worth slowing down in dialogue scenes and asking, what's happening physically in this moment? What does the body do while the words are being said? And that physical layer added into the dialogue is where a lot of the emotional truth lives. Now, I told you I was going to give you a tool I use with my coaching clients called the subtext map. And this is how you take all three principles and you apply them practically to any scene that isn't working. And here's how it works. You take a dialogue scene that feels flat or just not quite right, and then I want you to read through it, and for every line of dialogue, write a note in the margin, not what the character says, but what they actually mean. So what are they hiding in those words? Or what do they want behind what they're actually saying? Perhaps it could also be, what are they afraid of? Then read those margin notes and ask yourself, is any of this coming through in the actual words? Sometimes you'll find that the subtext is there. It's in the gaps and the evasions and the word choices, and the scene works actually better than you thought it was. Other times, you'll find that the dialogue is doing all the work on the surface and none of it underneath. And that's your cue to rewrite some of that dialogue. Not by necessarily inserting more emotion or explaining more, but by letting the character have the conversation they would actually have given what they're carrying underneath everything. And here's where your modality awareness becomes a practical editing tool. If you're auditory digital, check whether your characters are being too articulate in moments of emotional pressure. If you're kinesthetic, check whether you're explaining feelings that should be implied. If you're visual, check whether you're describing the scene so thoroughly that the emotional content of the dialogue itself is getting lost. And if you're an auditory writer, check whether the most beautiful line is actually the most true line for this character in this moment. Now, if you don't know what your writing modality is, just take my quick quiz at madisonmichaels.com/quiz, and that will give you a really good idea as to what you do dominate in. And what I then would like you to do is your homework for today is to pick one dialogue scene, one that you're uncertain about or one that you've written more times than once, and I want you to run the subtext map on it. So character by character, line by line. And then ask yourself, which of my own tendencies am I writing into this scene? Or perhaps what would shift if this character processed the world completely different to me? So if you're listening to this and realizing that the way you approach dialogue, the way you hear it, feel it, or process it might actually be shaping how you're wired as a writer, then you can probably also see why certain advice has worked for you and why some of it just hasn't. Now, before I let you go today, I want to share something that I'm so excited about because I have just created a new session in my coaching framework called the Writing Personality Blueprint Session. Because you know that so much of what we talk about today, it comes down to one thing: understanding yourself as a writer. And that's exactly why I created these sessions. It's a one-off session, a one-on-one session for 1 hour where we dive into how you are wired to write as a writer. Because here's the thing that I know after coaching a lot of writers: you're not procrastinating because you're lazy. You're stuck because you've been trying to write in a way that doesn't match how your brain actually works. So in this one-on-one session, we're going to map out your full writing personality, your patterns, your resistance triggers, and the strategies that will actually work for you. So not generic advice and not someone else's routine, yours. What is going to work for how you are uniquely wired? And you walk away with a 60-minute deep dive session, a personalized writing personality blueprint report, and a full replay of our session. So it's your own writing manual to return to whenever you need it. So if you're keen to find out how you are uniquely wired and how you can harness your traits to really get your writing flowing, then head to madisonmichaels.com/blueprint. There's also the link in the show notes, but that's going to give you all the information you need. So go and check it out, and you'll see that there's a special introductory offer on right now, and only a small amount of sessions will be available each month due to my limited availability. I'd love to help you. So if you do think it is finally time to figure out how you are wired to write, then make sure you book in for a session. And before we head off for today, remember, dialogue is one of those things that once it clicks, it really does transform your writing and your book. And it clicks fastest when you understand both the craft and yourself, when you know what the words are supposed to be doing and you know what you naturally bring to them and where your blind spots are. That combination of awareness is powerful. And remember, my friends, you are the vessel for your story. Let the words flow through you and onto the page. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode. And let's write the darn book together. My friend, I hope today's episode gave you exactly what you needed for your writing journey. And if it did, would you take 30 seconds to share it with another writer who's struggling to start or finish their book? And if you're loving the show, I'd be so grateful if you left a quick review. It means the world to me and truly makes my day to know that this podcast is helping you. And as you head back into your week, I hope you feel more supported and connected to your creativity. And remember, you're a vessel for the story. So let the words flow through you and onto the page. All right, I'm off to refill my cup of liquid gold and go and do a little writing of my own. Take care, and I'll meet you back here in the next episode of Write the Darn Book.